Hello YouTube, this is Scraps from GriffinMods. Today I'm going to be bringing you a mod guide video for the brand new Nerf Elite Rampage. This is a very impressive new blaster from Nerf. It gets 75-foot ranges stock, but it still has an air restrictor and a few other flaws in the internals that we're going to fix and work around, and I really cannot wait to see how it performs after we've modified it. The first thing you're going to want to do when taking this apart is take off the end cap here. It has two larger size Phillip head screws. They're slightly bigger than the screws in the rest of the blaster. I've already gone ahead and loosened those. Let me take the cap off here. This is the direct plunger rod sticking out of the blaster. You can see the hole in the back here is fairly smaller than that of a Raider, and that's because you don't have the whole reverse plunger tube sticking out of the back of the blaster. You just have the smaller direct plunger, and there's a much smaller spring that's retained here. One thing I wanted to show you before we take the rest of the blaster apart is as I pull the trigger here and you watch the plunger rod, you can see how slowly it returns into the plunger tube. That's because there is an air restrictor inside. Once we remove that, it'll slam shut much faster and hopefully put a lot more force behind the dart, as well as a few other modifications that I'll get into as we take the blaster apart. Now this thing has several screws on the outside of it, not quite as many as there are on a Stampede, but still quite a few. Luckily they're smaller length screws, so they don't take quite that long to get out. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove the priming handle, which has 5 screws in it, and then you're going to want to one by one remove the screws from the body. What I like to do when I'm taking the screws out of these things is, as much as possible, try to leave the screws in the top shell of the blaster itself, and that way I can just fillet it and lift it off, and I don't have to worry about finding where each and every screw goes, even though they are all pretty much the same size in this blaster. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for just a moment as I take those all out, and I'll see you here in a minute. So I've removed all the screws from the outer shell of the Rampage, and let's go ahead and open her up and talk about what we're going to do to the inside. Now the first thing you'll notice here is the completely redesigned direct plunger system. Now it's important to note that the plunger itself is much larger than the one of the Retaliator, which allows for a lot more air volume and a lot more modding potential, which is very, very cool. I'm going to go ahead and start deconstructing it now, and we'll talk about what we're doing to the internals. One of the new things they've done with this Elite series is they've actually rifled the barrels, which you can see there, which I doubt it has too much effect on the accuracy, but it's really cool. It almost looks like you're staring down the beginning of a James Bond movie. The trigger mechanism is pretty much the same as the Raider and the regular N-Strike blasters. This is the new spring that Nerf is using in the Elite series for the direct plunger design. Now I poured through most of the springs that I have laying around, everything from Stampede springs to aftermarket Vulcan springs and Maverick springs, and I couldn't quite find one that fit or functioned the way that I wanted it to. Now I heard from Nerf Haven, I think Lasagna, said that the K11 springs work pretty good if you cut them down to size, but I don't have any of those handy, so we're just going to be creative. One thing that we're going to do to try to get a little more spring pressure is I'm going to stretch this out just a little bit. You don't want to stretch it too much because you don't want to deform it, but I'm going to stretch it out just a little bit here. And then we're going to start deconstructing the inside and looking at the internals. This is the new redesigned trigger catch. It's been redesigned to accommodate the direct plunger design. You can see it's much more open, and it's got this little lip here. This is what it actually catches the plunger itself. It's made out of this white plastic that seems to be a little bit stronger and more durable than the plastic that they used on the previous trigger catches, and they also appear to have a stronger trigger catch spring on here than they did in previous Nerf blasters. I'm going to go ahead and remove the bolt sled and plunger assembly. One of the other cool things that they've done here that's specific to the Rampage versus the Raider is they've actually made all this one solid piece. If you look at the internals of the Raider, I have a comparison video here on our page as well. In the Raider, these were all separate pieces that were either screwed into the shell or screwed together, and they kind of wobbled around and didn't fit together real well. They've included everything in one solid piece here, which I think is part of the reason that the prime is so smooth on this blaster in comparison to the Raider, which is a very good idea. I think part of the reason that Nerf has gone and done this Elite series, which is a smart move on their part, is to try to eliminate some of the easy mods. So there's not, with a lot of these new Elite blasters, there's not a whole lot of mods that you can do in comparison to the older in-strike blasters, but I'm sure we'll find a lot of cool things as more people get their hands on these and as they put out more and more blasters from the Elite line. Now as I take apart the breech itself, you'll notice that this is the new Elite breech or bolt. The bolt sled itself is pretty much the same, but you can see that the breech ends right here, and it has a rubber washer, and this actually slides into the plunger tube. Flip it over here, and pushes the plunger itself back as you prime the blaster. And then when you move the bolt sled forward, the plunger stays back until you release the trigger catch, at which point it slides forward and meets the breech itself. So if you look closely here, you can see that the breech does in fact have an air restrictor like we talked about earlier. So we're going to go ahead and drill that out. But first I want to show you the plunger tube here in a little bit more detail. Now the plunger tube itself, something else they've done with this new Nerf Elite line, is I'm going to pull the plunger back, and they have made a 100% air seal in the new plunger design. This is incapable of being pushed further forward without air escaping around my finger. So they've done a very good job at improving the air seals on these new blasters. And I'm not going to illustrate it, but when you have the breech itself put in position on the plunger tube, it has the same 100% air seal, which is fantastic. This piece right here is part of what's responsible for the slam fire, and again, it's included in this whole housing here, and moves around a lot less than it did in the Raider for that much smoother priming that we were talking about. Now over here, this is the lock that prevents the jam door from being open. And I'm going to go ahead and take that out because I like being able to open my jam door whenever I want, and not just when Nerf wants me to. There we go. Now on the plunger tube itself back here, and the plunger, let me grab the spring. One of the other things I'm going to do to try to get a higher spring compression out of this is I think I'm going to put some hot glue right here around the edge where the spring would normally rest, and that'll make the spring rest up a little bit higher and give us a little bit higher compression rate, and hopefully help out our ranges just a little bit. I also want to show you the dart tooth here. They have redesigned the dart tooth on the Elite series. On the previous in-strike blasters, the dart tooth was just a simple pull-down lever here that was pushed down as you slide the bolt sled forward and moved out of the way. And what they've done is they've put in a dart tooth that's almost exactly the same as the one on the Stampede, where the bolt sled pushes down the lock. This is actually a lock for the dart tooth. And then once the lock is out of the way, the breech itself actually opens the dart tooth as it slides forward, which is cool. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I went ahead and I drilled out the air restrictors with my Mondo drill bit here that I use for all of my air restrictor removals. It's super long and just the right size, so it works great on just about any blaster. This is the air restrictor that came out, as well as the spring that I removed with a pair of needle nose pliers. And you can see that we've got a nice clean hole here in the breech, and no more air restrictor. There is a little plastic ring in there similar to what comes out of the air restrictor of a Maverick. I didn't take that out for two reasons. One, there is a lip on either side of the inside of this breech that would make it extremely difficult to remove, and two, it also is functional in that it channels the air a little bit inside the breech, which is necessary to get good ranges for your darts. Now on the plunger tube itself, the lube in there was pretty good, but I went ahead and sprayed in some white lithium grease to free it up just a little bit. And then I went ahead and made a, we'll call it a glue mound on the back of the plunger face. I did this by putting several dots of glue with the glue gun and then slowly rotating it and building up around it till I got the shape that I wanted. And then I let it dry upside down in the cooler to get in the freezer to get the desired effect. And so you can see when I put the spring on here, it seems like it's going to function exactly like we hoped it would. And it'll give us a little more compression on that spring and hopefully some better ranges. So at this point I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put everything back. I have now reassembled the Rampage, and something I forgot to mention earlier, when you're doing the lock removal for the jam door, you also need to go ahead and cut off or file down this lip on the inside of the jam door here. I actually cut it off with my Dremel, but as you can see, the jam door now functions freely while the breech is closed. I also haven't replaced the cap on the end of the blaster yet for this reason. You can see the plunger rod sticking out the back there, and as I fire it, there is no lag at all. It actually almost vanishes into the back of the blaster with a nice little thwack. It was a lot quieter before. So let's get right to it. I'm going to go ahead and load the barrel drum on this thing and we'll see what kind of ranges we get. I'm going to start out with a couple of level shots. When we were range testing these outside before stock, they were getting about 50-60 feet level and getting the 75 feet, the Nerf claims, on angled shots. So we'll see what they do with some GriffinMods inside. Wow, so that was a level shot. Here's the second one. And I'd say those are easily pushing 70 feet with level shots. I'm going to go ahead and give it a couple of angle shots and see what the outside of these ranges are. That one actually bounced off the garage. Wow. So I don't have any tape laid out, but based on experience, I'm going to go ahead and say that 2 out of those 3 darts nearly hit the century mark. I'm going to go ahead and say that those were right around 90 feet. That's right, 90-foot ranges out of this modified Rampage, which is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and follow this up with an actual range test outside with tape to prove just how far these darts are going, but I am extremely happy with the way these turned out. Again, this is Scraps from GriffinMods. If you're interested in some of the other stuff that we do, go ahead and check us out on Facebook. That's Griffin